Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Thank you for listening to the GSMC Sex Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Gaelika Brown. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast platform and write a review. Those reviews help the show. Also, follow the GSMC Sex Podcast on Twitter at GSMC_sex. Now, I am not a sex therapist. I love me some Dr. Ruth though, but I ain't Dr. Ruth. However, I've spent some time on this earth and have experienced some things, and I've witnessed some things, and because I am an excellent listener, I have heard some things. I'm a student of human behavior, and I love to learn. I love to research topics and present what I have learned. And of course, I'm going to give my 2 cents about the matter. But I will also include what experts have to say. So now, let's talk about sex. In my opinion, sex and relationships go hand in hand. You can't talk about sex without talking about relationships. Relationships don't have to be romantic or monogamous. You can have an agreement with someone to keep things casual. Whether it's monogamous or casual, if 2 or more people come together for sex, there are expectations. That's the topic of this episode. Expectations. But we are going to talk about between 2 people, because dealing with sexual expectations between 2 people is challenging enough. It gets more complicated once more bodies are added to the mix. And when we get to the get down part of it, we are going to discuss heterosexual sex. But the relationship part of this episode, for the most part, translates to all. Expectations. Let's first break down the word, which comes from expect. According to Merriam-Webster, expect means to be considered probable or certain. For example, I'm certain that I'm going to orgasm tonight. Expectations means the act or state of expecting. Anticipation, for example, anticipating an amazing sex session tonight. Every single person has their expectations when it comes to sex, whether it's spoken or unspoken, whether it's based off of past sexual experiences, porn, or stories you heard. We have our expectations. In my Why You Mad episode, we read some advice from sex therapist Vanessa Marin. She gave it an article on bustle.com. Now, I found another article she wrote entitled, "My boyfriend wants to have sex all the time and I don't. So what do I do?" A woman writes in and asks, "Do you have advice for what to do when you and your partner are on different pages about how much sex you should be having? My boyfriend would be happy with sex practically every day, but my sex drive is way lower. Maybe 2 to 3 times a month would be fine. I'll admit that sometimes I turn him down because he can be so demanding and whiny when he initiates, and it turns me off. I don't want to break up, but I don't want to fake being into it when I'm not. What should I do?" So here we have a woman who expects to have sex 2 to 3 times a month, while her man expects to have sex daily. What does the sex therapist have to say? In my experience as a therapist, this is the most common argument couples have about sex, by far. I think a lot of couples operate under the belief that healthy or normal couples are supposed to always want sex at exactly the same time. This could be further from the truth. Would you expect to be completely in sync with your boyfriend with any of your other needs? Should you always want the same thing he does for dinner? Or should he always want to watch TV when you do? Of course not. Sexual desires and needs vary so much from person to person. that it's impossible to ever be on exactly the same page. What's more important than arbitrarily deciding how many times to have sex every week is to get more skillful at negotiating each potential sexual interaction. So, how do you go about doing that? Here are 5 crucial steps you can take. Vanessa loves her list, so here we go. We ain't gonna go through the whole thing. But number 1, address your initiation. I think it's important for couples to talk about their sexual initiation patterns. It sounds like your boyfriend is initiating sex in a way that isn't exactly inspiring you to say yes. Maybe if he offered to give you a back massage first, or if he used an inside joke that always makes you laugh. A lot of couples initiate sex non-verbally, which can start to cause confusion and stress. Both you and your boyfriend can practice saying, "I want you," or "I'm so turned on right now." Use your words when you're turning each other down too. If he knows you're not in the mood because you're stressed out from work, he's less likely to take it personally. This might sound obvious, but men and women operate differently when it comes to sex. The average woman requires a lot more time to warm up to intimacy than the average man. For most men, physiological arousal follows psychological desire. They feel horny first, then their bodies respond to getting erections. For women, it can often be the reverse. They need to feel physiological signs of arousal before they feel turned on. Whew. All right. That was a lot. I know, right? It would be a lot easier if men and women operated the same when it comes to sex. I suppose that is one of the benefits to same-sex relationships. But there ain't nothing we can do about our biological makeup, so let's move forward with the article. Because of this, I encourage many of my female clients to give themselves a little bit of time before responding to initiations. Think about your own natural rhythm. Are you usually good to go right away, or do you take some time to get turned on? Try to estimate how much time it generally takes you to get aroused and give yourself that much time before saying yes or no. All right. My 2 cents. Yes, talk about your natural rhythm and communicate that to your partner. And it can be communicated in a fun, sexy way. For example, ladies, if it's all about the mental for you, meaning mentally you have to be in the right frame of mind, rather than waking up that morning and expecting to get some at the end of the day and being disappointed when your man eats dinner and falls asleep on you, try sending sexy text messages throughout the day, letting him know that it's on and cracking when y'all see each other tonight. Now, mentally, you are preparing or prepping for the evening and getting that pre-arousal through all day foreplay. And he knows you are expecting to get some, even if you don't say it exactly. And fellas, if your woman is texting you and not clearly using the words, take some initiative and be fun with it. So, does this mean I'm getting some tonight? Sometimes that can lead to an amazing sex session. And sometimes one or both of y'all are so exhausted by the day that you still end up eating dinner and falling asleep. If you know your pattern, then maybe try skipping dinner and getting right to it. You can always eat afterwards. And if it truly is an amazing sesh, I'm sure you will work up an appetite. Or maybe you just fall asleep, which means you burn calories and skip a meal. That's a win-win for both. So, we're going to take a break. And when we return, we will talk about number 2 on the list.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Gaelika Brown. This episode's topic is about sexual expectations. Before the break, sex therapist Vanessa was giving advice to a woman whose boyfriend wants sex daily when she is fine with 2 to 3 times a month. So let's get back to that list. Number 2 on the therapist list is have other kinds of sex. Keep in mind that responding to your boyfriend's initiations isn't a black or white decision. You can say yes to kissing, massage, or foreplay without saying yes to sex. If you're not in the mood when he initiates sex, take a moment to ask yourself if there's something else that sounds appealing to you. So if you eliminate the pressure of feeling like it's an all or nothing decision, you're more likely to be open to being intimate. Now, I can't speak for men, but ladies, I'm sure we have all had moments when we were not in the mood, and a great makeout sesh or a massage sesh changed all of that. Or when you're in a deep sleep and get awakened and it turns into a dope sesh. So maybe don't be too quick to make up your mind and say no to sex, because you can always change it if indeed you don't want none. And in this segment, we will discuss the importance of sexual compatibility. What does sex therapist Vanessa have to say? Most people don't value sexual compatibility enough. We give more weight to other things like looks, money, life ambitions, and shared values. I've worked with lots of couples who clearly knew that they were sexually incompatible, even from the early stages of their relationship. They continued dating anyways because they didn't think their lack of compatibility was good enough reason to break up. Or was a good enough reason to break up? Now that's just crazy to me. If the sex is whack, why are you staying? In my Why You Mad podcast episode, we discovered, which really isn't a shock, that the number one thing couples fight about is sex. That shows how important sex is in a relationship. So if you're not sexually compatible, that definitely needs to be recognized and addressed. The therapist goes on to say, in my opinion, sexual compatibility is one of the most important aspects of a relationship. Like I said at the beginning of the article, you're never going to be exactly on the same page, but every day and once every other week are pretty different. I think you should take the time to think about whether or not this relationship is working for you. Are you sexually satisfied? Can you envision this sexual dynamic in the long term? At the end of the day, you're the only person who can make the call about whether these differences feel surmountable or not. My 2 cents. Facts. Know yourself. Know what gets you going. Know what gets you off. Know your sex drive. Know what you can tolerate and what you can't. Once you know, then it makes it easier to determine if you are indeed sexually compatible with a person. Are there minor tweaks that need to be made in order to continue? Because tweaks are doable. Any major adjustments will not only cause trouble when it comes to sex, but it will bleed into the rest of the relationship. In an article in Psychology Today, Dr. Kristen Mark writes, perceived sexual compatibility is defined as the extent to which a couple perceives they share sexual beliefs, preferences, desires, and needs with their partner. Another form of sexual compatibility is the extent to which similarities exist between actual turn-ons and turn-offs for each other, emotionally, cognitively, and behaviorally. Perceiving sexual compatibility with a partner has been shown to be related to sexual satisfaction, such that the more sexually compatible you are, the more sexually satisfied you are. And researchers have consistently found that sexual satisfaction is also significantly positively related to relationship satisfaction. When one increases or decreases, the other tends to follow. See, sexual compatibility is uber important. And it isn't just about having the same turn-ons and turn-offs, like one partner likes to have sex with the lights on while the other likes to have sex with the lights off. That's minor. The question is, how is the sex despite the lighting? Are you both sexually satisfied? Dr. Mark says, regardless of whether you like to engage in the same sexual behaviors as your partner, As long as you perceive you are compatible, you'll be sexually and relationally satisfied. Yes, perception is everything. And y'all's perception is all that matters, not what others think they perceived. You may have heard that perception of a situation is a reality of the situation. So what the two of you perceive is y'all's reality, which means y'all need to be on the same perception page, or at least the same chapter, which brings us to communication. That damn communication. All this talk about feelings and desires, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes you just want a nut and not talk about how to achieve that nut. And sometimes you meet that person where no convo is needed. The two of you are just in sync. And maybe you are the type to just move on to the next without a combo. Maybe you are getting your Goldilocks on and trying out all the beds and eating all the porridge until you find the one that is just right. And if that is you, then do you, boo. But if that just right person was 3 porridges ago and all you needed was a quick combo to get on the same page, how you gonna feel about that? You just gonna be eating lots of porridge, laying in lots of beds, when you could have had that combo 3 porridges ago. Just some food for thought. I ain't telling you how to live your life, but I can almost guarantee that if you want as close to a perfect sexual compatibility as possible, at some point in your sexual lifespan, you will need to do the C word and communicate. It's time for another break, but when we return, we talk sexual positions.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Gaelika Brown, and this episode's topic is on expectations. Movies, TV, books, and porn paint a very unrealistic picture of sex. It's either super romantic and well choreographed, couples flowing from one position to another, making beautiful sex faces and harmonizing sounds. Or porn where it's rough and hot and lasts forever with multiple orgasms, so many orgasms, Count Dracula can't keep up. 1, 2, 3. But according to a survey I found on fatherly.com, the average sex session lasts just under 5.5 minutes. That's from the time of penetration to ejaculation. They even came up with an official term for it, y'all. It's called intravaginal ejaculation. Intravaginal ejaculation latency time. Now that's a mouthful. No pun intended. Let's try saying that fast 3 times. Intravaginal ejaculation latency time. Intravaginal ejaculation latency time. Yeah, can't do it. That was a mouthful. Okay, moving on. So, they surveyed 500 couples globally. A 5.5 minute sex sesh can be problematic when it comes to the amount of time it takes a woman to hit her climax, which typically takes about 20 minutes for a woman to orgasm. So damn, ladies. Does that mean we just don't ever get ours? Unless maybe we're in a same-sex relationship? No, of course not. It just means we have to do what we do best. Be strategic about it. It's all about strategy, ladies. Here's a list of sexual positions that will make a dude last longer. So whip out your playbook and get your game plan ready. First one, spooning. You're both on your side. He shimmies up behind you. You stick your butt out and maybe lift a leg. This position helps guys last longer because for the most part, you're snuggled so close, there isn't much room for quick thrust. The closer you get, the better for this one. Plus, this position requires some careful maneuvering, which means he'll have to focus on something other than finishing up fast. Sitting. You both sit crisscross applesauce. He will sit down and cross his legs, and you will sit on top of him. This position is very sweet and very sensual. It's also one that limits a guy's ability to move too quickly, which is important when trying to prolong sex. Ladies can move up and down and round, but there's really no way he can start delivering fast, intense thrusts to reach his climax. Women, to gain further control in this position, wrap your arms around his neck and lean back. Lean back. Lean back. It will provide a nice visual tease and encourage more shallow penetration, helping him last longer. Cowgirl. Ladies, I'm sure you already have this in your playbook, but in case you don't, any position that places a woman on top will limit his range of motion. Cowgirl is one such possibility. Reverse cowgirl is another. These kinds of positions do allow for deep penetration, but since you're in control, you can move up and down slowly or in slow circles. He'll definitely enjoy the sexual stimulation and the view, but he isn't able to get off quick here. Typically, women in these kinds of positions enjoy slower, smaller thrust. Sitting in a chair. Again, any position that places you on top will limit his range of motion. Face away from him and lower your butt onto his lap, having him use his hands to guide insertion. Use the armrest for extra support. If you ain't got an armrest, then put your hands on your knees and support yourself. Similar to doggy style, you still get the rear entry, but since you're in charge of this action, he probably won't get overstimulated until you want him to. Side by side. Lay on your sides, facing each other. His pelvis should be lower than yours. Lift your top leg and wrap it around his waist. Once he has penetrated you, wrap your leg around him tightly. You can initiate movement by squeezing him closer before releasing him, or he can move by gently pulling away and pushing closer. Testicle pull. I'm sorry now, but this one is new information for me. But apparently, some guys have a trick where if you pull down gently on their balls, they won't come as quickly. This is probably one of those distraction moves. Plus, ordinarily, just before he's about to ejaculate, his testicles will elevate. Pulling them down prevents this, according to sexologist Carol Queen. She might be the queen at this, so you may want to take that advice, y'all. And finally, do anything but the position he loves. Save that for last, because that is probably his favorite because he gets the most pleasure and gets him off sooner. So do all of the above and save his fave for the finisher. Let him get his Mortal Kombat on and finish her. So in segment 2, we talked about the importance of sexual compatibility and how most people don't pay it no mind and instead focus on other areas. Well, in an article in Psychology Today entitled The Secret Reason Why Sex is So Crucial in Relationships, a well-investigated study points to the surprising role not of the sex itself, but of the affection that accompanies sexuality between partners. The author's findings concluded, sex seems not only beneficial because of its physiological or hedonic effects. Hedonic means relating to or characterized by pleasure. So basically the benefit of sex are not all about the physical pleasure, but because it promotes a stronger and more positive connection with the partner. Over time, such experiences build to strengthen the bonds between partners, meaning that their long-term relationship satisfaction is bolstered as well. These effects extend to the experience of one's partner because, as shown when partners' response were analyzed in terms of their effects on each other, when one person draws emotional benefits from sex, their partner's relationship satisfaction is also promoted over time. So how does this all tie into expectations? Well, like we discussed earlier, each person has their own expectations when it comes to sex. It may be skewed by what entertainment shows us. It may be based off of past experiences. Maybe you don't and have never had a positive sexual experience. Maybe you don't equate sex to happy thoughts because of a past trauma or others' past trauma. So maybe you don't expect pleasure from sex. Maybe sex is a chore to you and an obligation to satisfy your partner. Either way, in any and all circumstances, forget about your expectations. Forget about that. And focus on your sexual compatibility. If you're in a relationship and you're not sexually compatible, communicate to each other and see if compatibility can be achieved. If you are in a compatible relationship or once you get into one, have lots of sex. Because like the study in Psychology Today says, sex promotes a stronger and more positive connection with the partner. I'm going to add my 2 cents and say sex promotes a stronger and more positive connection if you are with the right partner. This bolsters your long-term relationship satisfaction. Now, on the flip side, sometimes there are external factors that lessens the frequency of sex. So here's what the site has to say about that. People may decrease their sexual activity as they get older due to physical changes. And couples that have recently had children may similarly have sex less often. But as long as couples maintain their affection toward each other, they might offset the potentially negative effects of lowered sexual activity. Conversely, when couples that feel they're drifting apart and therefore having sex less often, if they work on their physical affection toward each other, their sexual relationship may become reestablished as well. So to sum things up, F expectations. Forget about them. Know yourself and know your sexual compatibility. Now, I definitely appreciate your time. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Sex Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Until next time, I'm Gaelika Brown.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast.